So, Trev, let's jump into the last part of our show. And this is going to be a little bit of fun. We're going to kind of go rapid fire here and just discuss these three things and what we're excited about. And we'll dive into each one. So I want to bring some up. I'll let you kind of talk about it. Then I'll give my thoughts on it, and we'll finish up with that. And then we'll do some super chats at the end, and then we'll get out of here because I think this has been a really good discussion. Yeah. But what are the three keys to success specifically for Notre Dame to go on a championship run? Because this whole conversation is not so much about Indiana. It's about Notre Dame competing for a championship. Indiana is part of that journey. We'll break down the specific matchup of them next week because we'll have all next week to break it down. This is more about Notre Dame focusing on Notre Dame. What are the three things that are going to be most important to this Notre Dame offense playing at a championship level for the next month plus of the season that leads to Notre Dame winning their 12th championship? And so that's what we're going to do next. And we're going to dive into that. And Trev, I think number one is super obvious and everyone's going to have it. Number one key, and we're not talking about things that you can't. These are things you can control. You can't control injuries, and that this is the things you can control. And that number one, the biggest key between Notre Dame now and over a month from now, hoisting up a national championship trophy, it's going to come down to number one, Riley Leonard's got to be the guy. He's got to be the best version of himself for the next month. He's got to be that guy that puts his team on his shoulders and says, follow me. You know what I mean? And if he can be the Navy version of Riley Leonard, right? The fourth quarter Texas A&M version of Riley Leonard, the first half Louisville version of Riley Leonard, the second, third quarter version of Stanford Riley Leonard, the second, third quarter from Georgia Tech version of Riley Leonard. I'm not sure if I said this or not, but the whole Navy game version of Riley Leonard, the whole Army game version of Riley Leonard, the third quarter against USC version of Riley Leonard. If we can get that guy with some consistency this next month, I'll say this Notre Dame offense can move and score on anybody, at least enough to go out and win every game and compete for a championship.
Yeah.
You need to have that. At least 3 of the 4 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you go back through and you look at every national championship team, and all quarterbacks are not created equally, but they all played the same role, right? Like Stetson Bennett looked different than Joe Burrow when he did it, and Mac Jones looked different from J.J. McCarthy when he did it. But what do they all have in common? You know what I'm saying? And so you kind of have to go through and look at what you need from Riley Leonard. And from a playing standpoint, he has shown it all year that he's had flashes. And as the season has gone on, those flashes have become more consistent to where the light's almost on. It really is almost there. And his stretch that he put together in his final 3 games, and then, you sprinkle the Navy game in there, leaves a lot of room for promise. But I've said this to everybody that's asked me about it. Do you think Riley Leonard can lead Notre Dame to a championship? I do, because now he's more comfortable in this system. And I know we're talking about things from this year, but you look at the experience that he had at Duke, where he was that team's offense. And he has had to play on teams where he had, like, if Riley Leonard wasn't being Riley Leonard, they're not beating Clemson week 1 of 2023. You know what I'm saying? So Notre Dame has a quarterback that has had the experience of having to be that guy. Now, this year, the learning curve, as funny as it is, the learning curve at the start of the season is he had to learn to not be that guy and trust the people around him. But like we've alluded to all show, the regular season is different than the playoffs. And there is going to be a moment. It could be a moment. It could be a game. It could be a quarter. It could be a series where there's going to come a time where, Denbrock's going to have to go up to number 13 on the sideline and say, hey, bud, we need you. This is why you come to Notre Dame. This is why we went out and got you in the portal. This is why your teams believe in you. This is why your coaching staff believes in you. We need you to go be the best version of yourself. And it's going to come down to that. Now, I don't know if it's going to be based on how this team is put together. It's not going to be all 4 games, right? Like it could, I'm not blind to that fact, but there will come a time where all of ND Nation, that entire team is going to look to number 13 and be like, all right, buddy, it's your time. Put it all together. We need you. And I think if Notre Dame makes a championship run, and they do things that they haven't done in my lifetime, a lot of it is going to be reflecting on how number 13 played in this 4-game stretch.
Trevin, we've seen it. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule in college football. J.J. McCarthy didn't have to put that team on his shoulders last year. But as you mentioned, in the second half against Alabama, when they were shutting the run game down, they needed to make some big plays. And I think of that ball he hit to Blake Corum, or not Blake Corum, but their slot receiver. I'm drawing a complete Roman Wilson. Right?
Yeah.
Just big time ball. But in a lot of other years, when you look at past champions and you look at how they performed in the postseason, it's like, okay, that explains it, right? I mean, look at Stetson Bennett in 2021, 2022 when they won their second championship. You look at and when I think championship, you've got to beat LSU in the SEC title game first, right? And he goes out there and goes 23 of 29 for 274 yards and 4 touchdowns. First round playoff semifinal game against Ohio State in a game where his defense could not stop Ohio State. You've got to be big time. He throws for 398 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Also rushed for a touchdown in that game. National championship game against TCU, he's lights out, 72% completions, 304 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2021, similar deal. You go through the entire regular season, and Stetson Bennett did not have a single game of over 300 yards. His highest passing total was 288 yards against UAB, right? His next highest total was 255 yards at Georgia Tech. In the postseason against Alabama, he throws for 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a loss. Goes out against Michigan, a really good Michigan defense, throws for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then goes 65.4%, 224 yards and 2 touchdowns, no picks, no turnovers against Alabama in the national title game. Completely rebounds, put up a bunch of yards in the first game, 7.1 yards per attempt, 2 interceptions. Championship game rematch, 8.6 yards per attempt, up to completion percentage by 5 points, 2 touchdowns, no picks, right? You look at Mac Jones in 2020. As good as Mac Jones was, you know what game he had his highest output of the season was? His highest yardage output of the season was in the national title game against Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
He completed over 80% of his passes in those 2 games, and he also ripped Florida up in a game in the SEC title game where your defense is struggling. You give up 46 points to Florida. He passes for 418 yards and 5 touchdowns. Right? Put that team on his shoulders. We remember what Joe Burrow did in 2019. We don't got to rehash that. Trevor Lawrence, is a true freshman in 2018. Goes through the season. He's a good player, 24 touchdowns, 4 picks in the regular season. He only throws for 118 yards in a blowout title game win over Pitt. Never really challenged. He had some games where he put up some yardage, but never really challenged during the regular season. Got knocked out of the only game against a ranked opponent they played all year where he was the starter. He came off the bench against A&M. Goes out in the postseason, he passes for 327 yards and 3 touchdowns against Notre Dame, and was smart enough when he saw Julian Love out to say, I'm throwing at that guy. And then in the title game against Alabama, throws for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? I think of Jacob Coker in 2015 for Alabama. Guy was a mediocre quarterback the entire season. Most yards he'd thrown in a game that year was 262. The next highest total he had was 247. That cat only passed for over 200 yards in 6 games, half the games in the regular season. He goes out in the semifinal game against Michigan State and throws for the most yards he's thrown for all season, 286 yards and 2 touchdowns. And guess what? Wasn't even close to the best he would play in the postseason. Goes out there against Clemson in the title game, passes for 335 yards and 2 touchdowns. That guy, literally the 2 best games that kid ever played in college were in the national semifinals and the national championship game. Right? Like, that's what the great teams do. And that's what champions do, is their quarterbacks step up and say, hey, we're going to do this thing. Now, none of those guys had to do it for 4 games. But there's a reason I brought up the SEC title games and the ACC title games and some of those, because you have to win that one to get there. So I don't expect Riley to do it for 4 games the way that Jacob Coker did. He only had to play 2. But you're going to need him to at least be that guy for 2 games, at least twice, if not 3 times. Riley Leonard's going to have to play his best football if this team is going to win. And that's where we're at. Number 2, Trev, and this is also plays into it, but Mike Denbrock has to be the aggressor in the postseason. No more take what the defense gives you that we saw early in the season. You've got to go out and say, hey, we're going to take the fight to you. We're going to attack you with tempo. We're going to be willing to attack you down the field if we see those opportunities. We're going to do things to get the ball to you, and we're not going to go away from what we do best. We're just going to find great ways to do it, right? We're not going to come out and be afraid to run the ball at you, but we're going to find ways to gash you with the run. We're going to attack you. We're going to be aggressive. If Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman has to allow him to do that, or if not encourage him to do that, say, hey, listen, no more methodical this, methodical that. We're going to take the fight to this team. That doesn't mean you're coming out looking like Oregon 2010 and you're throwing a bunch of bombs, but you are the tone setter, whether that's up in the tempo, whether that's taking some shots early if they present them there. If it's you're up by 7 and you get the ball back with a minute left, don't take a knee and go up 7. Be aggressive. Go for it. Go up 14 or 10 going into halftime. Those are things we're talking about, Trevor. You got a team, and this is what Texas did not do against Georgia. They had their boot on their throat, or they had a chance to put their boot on their throat against Georgia early in the game, and they didn't do it. They coached scared of Georgia's front 7. Steve Sarkisian, great mind, but he coached like he was afraid of the matchup between his lines and the Georgia lines, and he didn't have answers for it. And so you had a chance to put that team away, and you couldn't do it. You can't make that mistake against Notre Dame, because what you and I said in the pregame show going into the Texas game is whatever you think about Georgia this year, overrated, all that, which I think that they are, that team has never – I've yet to see one game this year, even the Ole Miss game where they just got whooped. They didn't quit. They were down big against 28-0 Alabama and just battled back. 17-0 to Georgia Tech, battled back. You know, they were getting whooped a little bit early by Tennessee and just kept fighting. That team will not quit on you. You better be up more than 9-3 at halftime if you're outgaining them 200 something to 90, which is what it was at halftime of the Georgia game against Texas. You have got to but that requires you to say, hey, we're going to go down swinging. If we're not going to win this thing, it's not going to be because, well, we were conservative, didn't want to make mistakes. No, you don't want to make mistakes. You got to protect the football. But that doesn't mean coaching scared or coaching passive. There's a difference between unnecessarily aggressive and taking the fight to your opponent. They got to take the fight to their opponent. And however that looks. And that's going to be a big dictate to what's the word? It's offense. Go on offense. Go on an offensive against the other team. Don't let them dictate to you what's going to happen. That's what I want to see. It starts with the head coach. The OC's got to carry it out, and then your players got to execute that game plan. It's got to be mentality every single day. How we've seen this team play the last 2 months, I think they're going to be there. But it's like you said about SMU in the ACC title game. Just because you've been this way during the regular season doesn't mean you're going to be that way when the title's on the line. And that's what we need to see is we need to say, don't lose. Matter of fact, be hungrier now than you were when you were playing teams that you were better than, like way better than. That's where I'm yeah, Jason, I was getting ready to say be offensive, but I was like, nope, that's not going to sound right. So I had to switch a little bit. So go on the offensive.
Yeah. No, I was waiting for that to come out, and I was like, all right, I'm going to see how this ends. But no,
Almost said it.
Well, look, man, I agree with you. Notre Dame needs to play offense, and I'm in some of the best games offensively that they've done, and I'll provide some examples soon. But what Notre Dame needs to do on offense is play like they don't have a top 5 defense. You know, like the one thing that I noticed, like that was kind of something that hindered Texas is they kind of went into a shell and they just relied on their defense being good. That's why their offense started to sputter. Partially, I mean, it was a really, really lazy run game setup for Texas in the SEC championship game. And I don't like a lot of the things that they were doing, but they kind of were just under that impression of like, oh, our defense is good, so they'll get a stop. Don't play like that, because in the games where Notre Dame's defense has not played like they did against a Stanford or just completely shutting down the teams like they did for the majority of the season, we saw some of Notre Dame's best offensive performances, right? You go back and you think to the Louisville game on September 28th, and the defense gave up a touchdown, albeit on a short field, you know what I mean? But then on, their longest field, luckily it ended in a turnover, but Tyler Shuck rips off a 40-some-odd yard run. So it kind of showed to the offense, this offense might be able to kind of move the ball a little bit on this defense. We got to go out and hold our own. What they do, hang 21 points in the first quarter, right? You go back and look at what they did at USC against USC. And it was a day where from very early on, even though they forced a turnover on downs on their first drive, the Notre Dame defense was looking like it wasn't going to be as it was the rest of the year. So what did the offense do? They scored 35 points in 3 quarters. So take that energy and move it into the playoffs. Don't play like you have I guess if we don't, our kick coverage teams have been pretty good and our defense is really good. No, dude, go out and dictate the pace of the game on offense. Make them play to your standard. Force a team into a position where they have to play from behind, because that is when your defense is the most dangerous. It makes offenses one-dimensional. And what's the best part of this Notre Dame defense? It's pass defense. So offense has to go out and dictate the pace, be the aggressor, and never be satisfied with how many points you put on the board. Couldn't agree more.
One thing that hurt them against USC is that they offensively first allowed USC back in that game. And as long as USC could keep it within a score, they could run their offense. They could run the ball. And Notre Dame had to play them straight up. There was never that time where they jumped out to a 2-3 score lead where they knew a pass was coming and they could heat USC up. Why were they able to kind of make that big turnover, those couple turnovers late in the game? Because they knew USC had to throw the football. And so they heat them up a little bit and force some of those mistakes that led them to put that game away. And a lot of that's on the offense, not making that fumble mistake like they had, right? So you can't make those kind of mistakes. You got to, and that's what I loved about the offense against USC. I thought the offense came out aggressive. And they ran hard at them. They were going to take a shot down the field. They had a corner fire, so the quarterback's got to make somebody miss and go make a play, right? I mean, those are all things that you got to see. And I thought they were aggressive. I mean, look, you need to have the same mindset now in the postseason that you had in the regular season. We're going to blow everybody out if we can. This isn't we're trying to win by. Look, winning by 1 is all that matters. But don't change the mindset that led you to be what you've been the last 2 months, which is we're going to come out and we're going to bury you. I don't care. Oh, yeah, you're the number 10 seed and that you're the number 2 seed. Don't care. We're Notre Dame. You're not. We're going to take it to you. And that's what I want to see from this offense. And then the final thing is, Trev, they got to be great in situational football. 3rd down, red zone, turnover battle, fast starts, that situational football, coming out situations where you're getting the ball at your own 12. You got to get a couple first downs to at least flip the field. If you do punt, you got to punt where you're flipping the field. That middle 8 period of the game, right? Last 4, first 4, that Notre Dame's been incredibly dominant in the regular season. You've got to be that again in the postseason. Situational football, Trev, is going to be super important for this offensive football team.
Yeah, it's going to be massive. The battlefield position, the turnover battle. Put yourself in positions to win as many matchups as you possibly can, right? I mean, you go through situational football. Again, I've been harping on it. The dumb penalties have to go away because those put you out of a position where you're playing situational football. Don't be in a spot where you're playing catch up. Win the early downs, right? Situational football. Convert on 3rd downs. Win in the red zone. Ideally touchdowns, right? It's taking advantage of every opportunity that you have offensively, right? I go and think of the special teams has ran a bunch of awesome fakes this year. And I think out of all of them that they've ran, they've gotten a field goal out of all of them, right? Take advantage of those opportunities when they come to you. Be really good situationally. I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree, Bryan.
Those are the 3 keys. I mean, now those are a little bit all-encompassing. Riley Leonard playing really well also means the pass pro is better, means the receivers are catching the football. I mean, those are all things that kind of go into it, but that's really what it comes down to, Trev. If they can do those things, this team is going to be really good. They're going to be really hard to stop. Before we get out of here, Trev, we did have 4 super chats that I want to get to. This one says, Aiden Benami, thank you for the super chat, Aiden. I continue to receive hate messages from my IU brethren. IB Nation has my back, right? Of course, as always. Prayed for any other matchup, but this one, Lord Father, let's win. Because Aiden is I believe, Aiden, you're a big IU basketball fan. He's one of those, Trev, that you've talked about. Guys that are like IU grads or IU basketball fans, but they're Notre Dame football fans. But, yeah, so we got your back, man, no doubt.
Yeah, look, Aiden, the one thing that I will say is I've had a couple of other friends that are Notre Dame football fans, IU basketball fans, but are rooting for the IU football team in this game because they like the basketball team, and to which I respond, so you're just an IU fan.
Right.
That's fine. So, Aiden, hats off to you. If you are going to be a split fan, root for that respective team.
In that season.
Yep.
Right.
So, I'm with you. We got your back, dude.
Yep, of course. Michael S., we'll talk more about this if it happens. I don't really care to spend a lot of energy on discussing what would happen if they lose. But I'll just give you a quick yes or no. Would a loss to IU mean a disappointing season? No. There's a difference between you didn't reach your potential as a team, which would be true if they do lose to Indiana, and it being a disappointing season. You just went 11-1. You're in the college football playoff berth. You're going to be playing at home. Should you be better than a one and done? Absolutely. Would it make for a disappointing season? No. Would it be a disappointing end to the season? Yes. Would it make for a disappointing season? No. Would it mean that this team did not achieve the success it should have? Yes, but I don't view that as a disappointment. I don't view that as unsuccessful. It just means it wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And then we can go back to the drawing board and figure out what do they need to do to get there next year. But no, it would not be a disappointing season.
Agreed.
So here's a super chat from Michael S. Didn't Army have a top rushing defense? How does it compare to the IU defense?
I mean, it's a tough comparison. So like I went through and I dove down into some of the stats, and a lot of it is respective to who you play, because on one hand you have Army, right, who is a group of 5 school and is playing a bunch of teams in the AAC, whereas IU is, well, they play in the Big Ten and they have, it's interesting, right? Because, there's 8 teams above 500 in the Big Ten. IU played 2 of them, lost 1, beat 1, right? And then you go through and you dive into offensively where a lot of the teams rank that they played. And like I said, I mean, there's 104, 131, 106, 118, 123, 110, and then another team tied for 110. The best rushing offense that they played statistically all year was Ohio State at number 59. So, it's tough. It doesn't make them a bad defense. Let me get that clear, right? Like it doesn't mean IU has a bad defense. They still have a really good rush defense, but I think it is also fair to say they haven't faced a rushing attack like Notre Dame's. So you kind of have to look at things respectively. It's the same thing with Army, right? Army didn't allow, I think Army came into the Notre Dame game allowing 1 rush of over 20 yards or more and 0 rushes of 30 or more. And 2 of Notre Dame's touchdowns were 30 or more. So I'm not saying they're going to repeat and do the same things to IU, because I think that, a Washington, a Nebraska, a Michigan are still better rushing offenses than what Army faced in the AAC. So, Michael S., I guess, 1, thank you for the super chat, but 2, my answer to that is just it's tough to gauge because their level of opponents are different when you're talking about those 2 defenses respectively.
I would say they're very similar because of what you said, Trevor, and that's kind of the point of it, right? I mean, neither of them are very big. I'll have I'm going to have Indiana's depth chart out. Just so you all know, by the way, I'm going to put an unofficial depth chart out for both teams to maybe later today, but definitely tomorrow, no later than tomorrow, where I don't care what they say the depth chart is. I'm looking at the games, who plays, who's in there, who's hurt, and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to put a depth chart out. When you look at Army's defensive front, it's very quick, it's very athletic, it's undersized. I don't know that it's as big man for man as what Army's front was. Mikhail Kamara, who's a heck of a player, transfer from James Madison, first-year guy. He was an all Big Ten guy, 6'1", 265. Their other end, Linnell Carr Jr., 2-year transfer from West Virginia, meaning this is the second year, 6'2", 246. Their 3-technique, James Carpenter, first-year guy from James Madison. He's 6'2", 288, so Howard Cross type of size. And then they got C.J. West, who's a first-year guy from Kent State, who's 6'2", 317. Their 2 inside linebackers are 6'1", 233, 6'1", 218, and then they'll also play Elijah Hardy a decent amount at Rover and inside. He's 5'11", 225. Their corners are 5'9", and 5'11". They're not a real big team. They're quick, they're athletic, they're incredibly well coached, and they play really hard. The thing you have to understand about this Indiana team is they took a bunch of the best players from the G5 level. James Madison, Old Dominion, Ohio U. There's 2 guys from Ohio U. There's a guy from Kent State, a whole bunch of guys from James Madison, a guy from Old Dominion. And they took the best from that level, and they still play with that G5 chip on their shoulder. And they're really smart, and they're really experienced, and that makes them a good team. Usually when you have a bunch of new transfers coming in, they don't play well together. But 5 of their transfers are from James Madison on defense. Starters are from James Madison. I mean, and the D coordinator came from James Madison. So basically you have 5 starters on your defense who are multi-year starters in this system. That has helped. And they play with a big-time chip on their shoulder. But again, they're not the biggest. They're not the most explosive. They're not, there's not a lot of first-round NFL draft picks in that group, but they play really good football. And it's exactly what we said about Army. Could Notre Dame run on Army? Of course. Are they just going to roll Army? No. They have to earn it. And guess what? They earned it. They blocked. They played incredibly well against Army. And it's going to be the same thing here. They're going to have to block hard. They're going to have to be disciplined. They're going to have to play with great timing. They're going to have to move their feet, use their hands. Backs are going to have to make good reads. If they do that, can they run on Army? Sure they can. But it's going to be earned because this is a more talented, athletic version of Army, but they're not quite as big and strong as Army. It's kind of how, does that make sense? I mean, I don't know. You've watched them both on film. Do you agree with that? I think this team is more athletic than what Army was.
Yes.
They're just as disciplined defensively, schematically as Army was. This team is not as big and strong as Army was, especially strong as Army was. And Army was missing one of their best defensive linemen in that game as well, which we can't remember. One of their edge players didn't play in that game either. It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, so they would have averaged 8.5 yards a carry instead of 9.5 yards a carry.
Right.
But it just at least needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good one there, Michael S. Thank you for that. And then last one here, super chat here is from AST12321. Trev, Indiana has a highly ranked rush defense, but so did Army. Do we expect IU will be able to force Notre Dame to pass more than they want, or should Notre Dame lean on them? This is a little bit of a different way of getting to that question. And I think the answer, and I'll let you address it first, is they're certainly going to try. And Notre Dame has to have a plan for that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the conversation that we had earlier in the show is your dudes have to be dudes. At some point in the playoffs, I'm not expecting Riley Leonard to start popping off for 350 yards a game. You have to do what got you here, and that's running the football. So I do expect IU to load the box, and I do expect IU to try to stop the run. And 12 other teams tried to do that to Notre Dame this year, and they couldn't. So that's not my prediction for the game. It's just – this isn't going to be the first matchup that Notre Dame has had this year where all of a sudden a team's going to try to stop the run. They have faced this for 12 straight games. And right now, opponents against Notre Dame's rush defense or rushing offense is 0 for 12. So I think
Louisville did a pretty good job of shutting down Notre Dame's run game.
Yeah.
And the difference is Louisville took a lot of chances in that game, and they worked. They're a very undisciplined, aggressive defense, and when it works, they look great, and when it doesn't, it looks like Miami.
Sure.
Right? And so it's like athletically, I think this team is more on line with what Louisville was athletically. They're not nearly as big as Louisville was. This team is more along the lines of Army from a discipline standpoint and a coaching standpoint.
Sure.
So that's what I say. They're nothing like Georgia Tech, who also slowed down. They don't have 300-pounders in the middle that can kind of eat up 2 blocks like Zeke Biggers did. CJ West is a nice player. He's not that. You know what I mean? As long as you play your game anyway, he's not that, I should say.
Sure.
So that's the thing. You look at it, Trev. It's like, what version are you going to get of Notre Dame, right? I mean, that's kind of part of what you're looking at is, do you allow the big guy up the middle to push you around like you did Zeke Biggers? Or do you move them like you have other teams, right? I mean, that's going to be the question mark, right? Can you find ways to run on their edge players who are short, stout guys, that can be moved? Can you find ways to do that? Those are going to be the question marks. But look, the thing about it is, the cold to me doesn't really affect throwing the ball nearly as much as people think it does if you are someone who has decent sized hands. And from everything I've seen from Riley Leonard and Curtis Rourke, I don't think either one of them seem to have like small hands. And the reason I say that is because when you have small hands, cold causes your skin to shrink. And if you have small hands, you get a little bit of it's harder to get as good of a grip on a cold ball, and your skin is softer, or not as harder and shortens. So you have to take that into consideration. But when you are, if you have bigger hands, cold is it's cold. You keep your hands warm, you blow on them, and you're fine. I mean, I've seen John Elway light teams up in the postseason for the Broncos from time to time. But here's where it gets troubling is when you have a combination of cold and wind. And the problem that you're going to have in the game from what we're going to see is you're going to have, it's projected to be over 10 miles an hour wind factor in that game. And as you know, being in Notre Dame Stadium, it can swirl. And so part of me says, as long as the wind's not too bad, I won't be shocked if Notre Dame comes out and tries to reverse engineer their offense a little bit, which we've seen them do at times, where they kind of come out and say, this first couple series, we're going to come out and we're going to do some things, move in the pocket, throwing the ball to back you up or maybe take a chance and hit a big play against your run-heavy scheme here. And then when we soften you up, then we're going to kind of come back with the running game. But if the wind is really swirling, then you may not be able to do that, and you're going to have to find ways to run the football. At the end of the day, you're going to have to find ways to run the football. And this is a team that is going to make you work for that. But it's not a team that's just going to go overwhelm you with, like I said, a bunch of first-round NFL draft picks. But this is an incredibly disciplined defense. And if you make mistakes, they will make you pay. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
But Army was the same way. And the reason that Notre Dame had so much success against Army is because Notre Dame did not make mistakes. The timing of the run game was the blocking in the run game was exceptional. I mean, it was really, really good. Their ability to kind of come out and just work the double teams and get to the second level and do all those things was really good. And the discipline that Notre Dame was able to match their discipline, and that's when the talent took over. And if they can do that, then I think they'll have a shot to do that. But, I mean, Indiana's going to try to force Notre Dame to throw the football early. Does Notre Dame oblige that and come out with a game plan kind of designed to soften Indiana up and make this a perimeter game against a pretty quality secondary that, again, it's a good secondary, doesn't have a lot of first-round draft picks on it. That's the whole point. And so that can you take – but Notre Dame also doesn't have a lot of first-round draft picks on their receiving core either. That's why we talked about Mitchell Evans needing to be a big factor, and then soften them up and then come back to the run game. Well, sure, that could work, but whatever you do, you better find success. So because Notre Dame's defense during this 2-month stretch, we'll talk about it on Thursday, has not been a great first 2 series defense for a while now, and so you can't fall behind a team like this 10-0, 14-0. Whatever you do, you got to come out and get points. But Notre Dame's going to have to be able to run football. You can't go into the postseason as good as they are running football and just say, well, we're going to let you take it away. You know, and Notre Dame didn't get here because teams were able to just like there were times under past coordinators where if teams came out with a real run-heavy defensive game plan, and honestly, we saw that a couple times from Mike Denbrock in September, that they would just start throwing the ball over the place. Out of the break, Mike Denbrock said, "No, we're going to run the ball. No matter, we're going to find ways to run the ball." However, sometimes that meant coming out early and throwing the ball a little bit and softening them up. I mean, I think the first 3 or 4 plays of the Stanford game, they threw the football, and we're moving the chains that way. You've got to be able to find ways to get early points and not let them completely take away what you do best. But that doesn't mean if they're going to overplay their hand that you can't or shouldn't find ways to hurt them in other areas. So if they do force Notre Dame out, then Notre Dame needs to make them pay for it. That's the big key. Because USC tried to do that in 2017. Do you remember? Early in the game, Notre Dame, yep, I think, went 3 and out on their first drive against USC. And USC was able to kind of get that stop. And then Notre Dame, what broke that game open? You had a reverse to Kevin Stefferson, but you had 2 shots down the field that Brandon Wimbush took. That's what really broke that game open. He hit that post route to EQ for a touchdown, and then he hit the back shoulder to Kevin Stefferson, and that's what really got him going. Yeah, they went 3 plays for -1 yards on that first drive, and that's really kind of what broke it open a little bit. You had a 12-yard run by Brandon Wimbush on a scramble, 13-yard run on a reverse to Kevin Stefferson, and then a 26-yard touchdown pass. And that kind of spooked them a little bit. And then Notre Dame comes out that next series, they're running the ball a lot better, and then of course they hit that back shoulder touchdown for a 23-yard touchdown, and USC was kind of shook at that point in time. They didn't know what to do, and that's when the run game started to really take over that game. So that's a big part of what they're going to need to do in this game is just you've got to find a way to, in December, in the cold, in the wind, you got to be able to run the football. Got to find ways to run the football.
100%. Got to have an answer. Got to have an answer.
So, Trev, man, that's going to do it. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yeah, you got it. Well, us here at Irish Breakdown are going to have a lot of content coming out. You guys know that. We're just as excited as you guys are that Notre Dame is going to be hosting the first college football playoff game at somebody's home field, and we're going to do that justice. I'm super pumped about it. I know that you guys are. But in order to be in the now, in order to know everything that's going on, be sure to subscribe to us at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We're going to have awesome content coming out all week. And of course, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with friends and family and anybody that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. So for Bryan, I'm Trevor. We will see you guys back here next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.